who's a lot like Janice. She said, you really ought to give that some thought. She said, that might be good for you. I was a little perturbed because, inventory taking you're not supposed to take, but she does a pretty good job at it. So I called Malcom, and it was 7 years ago that I came up here, and I met a group of people here. Wow. It was a different experience. I met Jerry and Gail, and Dick and Deb, and Dana and Janice, Billy, and guess what? I keep getting asked to come back. There's a new bunch of people. Malcom was saying, we don't have all the old regulars from last year and the year before coming this year. He said, we got about 30 or so new ones and everything else. And I said, well, that's going to be a different experience. We'll be sitting around here, and I'm sitting over here making coffee tonight, and so we can have some coffee. And in walks this guy, and he comes in, and he comes talking to us, and he says, I introduce myself, and he says, I'm Steve. And he goes, Malcom told me I had to talk to you. I said, why would Malcom tell him to talk to me? I'm just a drunk. I'm one of those drunks that I know I'm a drunk. I was angry for the first 5 years of my recovery because I wanted to go drink and use a whole bunch of other mood-altering substances that enhance that ability to drive people away from me. And so I figured if I could perturb you, I'd heard a vicious rumor about AA that they'd never kicked anybody out. So I sharpened the needles, and I got my wit about me, and I poked and prodded and pricked and jousted with a bunch of old-timers. And they gave me all this good stuff, like you're right where you belong. Keep coming back. We'll love you till you learn to love yourself. And I'd leave and I'd say, I'll get to him yet. That die-hard attitude of the alcoholic. In about 5 years, an old gray-haired man who I grew to love took and run into me at a meeting. I'd went out of town to get drunk. I was going to go to a meeting. If I didn't hear anything that I needed to hear, I was going to go get drunk. And this guy showed up at the meeting, and I was sitting in the back corner so nobody'd see me, nobody knew me, and he come walking in, and he sat down, and he talked to me for about 5 minutes, and he says, whatever you do, don't leave till the miracle happens. And I didn't go pick up a drink that night. He pissed me off enough, so I went home. His needles and stuff were sharper than mine, and he got the message in somehow, and that's where the miracle happens, folks. So that's why I'm here. And I know this weekend will be completely different than any one I've had in the 7 years that I've been here, because you're all here. So, thanks.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, Ron, and thank everybody for your comments and for an opportunity to get to know all of you a little bit. Some of you touched on the fact that we all bring God in here with us, and the presence of God is multiplied by the presence of all of you. And, I can feel it, and it touches me. And this is an experience that I cannot, as a real alcoholic, live without. This is, I have to be here. And I have to be engaged in the solution. And I have to be engaged in sitting across a table with a book with you and making this happen. There is no life for me otherwise. And let me just make a suggestion before we reconvene over in the meeting room, and I give the mic to Dick to make a closing comment. Now that everybody's been introduced and everybody knows who everybody is, before we reconvene in the meeting room, make sure that you introduce yourself to somebody that you don't know. Okay? Here you go, Dick.
I can't top that. Let's take a break and we'll meet across the street.
Yeah, 15 minutes. Dick's going to start our later session.
Let's take a minute, if we can, to get recentered. Get quiet. Let the Spirit talk to us. When I look back at my life and my alcoholism, I can go back. I can really remember. I don't know whether you guys can. My daughter will tell me she doesn't remember a thing about her childhood, but I can remember back very clearly to probably when I was about 4 years old, and I can remember going to kindergarten, and I can remember in kindergarten the first day and just how lost I was. And I can remember talking to my mother about it, and she said, "Oh, you just had butterflies, and they'll go away." And when I look back at my childhood, one of the things that becomes very clear to me is that right from as far back as I can remember, I was on the outside, not on the inside. See, I looked around, at the kids, and they all seemed to be connected. And Jerry talks a lot about this, so I'll steal his line because he's not here. One of the things I learned from a very young age in life was if I told you what you wanted to hear, basically you'd get off my back. And my childhood looked like that. I have a little string that I like to use. I call it problem, solution. And those of you that know me have heard this before. But, if I have the problem I have isn't alcohol. The problem I have is it roots in the beginning of what I started to describe, that apartness, and so as I go up through my life, through my alcoholism, the unmanageability of my life begins to become more and more apparent, and that's the problem. In a short description, so I have to find a solution, and the solution is alcohol for me. So I have a problem, and alcohol offers a solution. And then the progression of the disease comes along. For me, it was 20 years. And the solution becomes the problem again. I can't drink with any predictability. When I drink one drink, I fall down. When I drink 13 or 15 drinks, I can't even get a buzz on. So then I come to here. I come to that spot that Chuck C talks about. He terms it as running out of time. I run out of time, and what I'm doing doesn't work anymore. And so I have to find a solution. And I end up here, and then I finally end up in the solution. So problem, solution, problem, solution. So, when I look back, we were with Ben Martin last night. Benny is a good friend of mine, one of the first guys that he was one of the guys that I was walking next to in this thing, and he said, one of the things that you hear a lot out in the halls of AA is that we acquire this disease. So, we go away to college and we drink too much, and then we become alcoholics. And, along with him, and I think most of us here that have been around a little bit, I don't believe that for a second. I think we're born with this disease. That's evidenced by the fact that it's really all around us. I was talking to somebody at the break, and if I look around at, I'm adopted and I'm an only child, so I don't have any history. History is blank. But ironically enough, I grew up in an alcoholic household with my adopted parents. My father was an alcoholic, and so I don't know, but I know that on Deb's side, there's a whole string of alcoholism, and so this is, like we talked about, it is a family disease. I hope I don't fall off here. So I'm in this problem that I inherit. I just I wake up one day, so to speak, and I have this inability to manage to live my life. I can't do it, and that's really what we're going to talk about a little bit tonight. That inability to manage my life. I tried and tried, and I couldn't do it. And I thought that, for me anyways, if I got enough things, that I'd finally be all right. I guess I term myself, this could be funny, it may not be, I don't know, a high-functioning alcoholic, if there's such a thing. And by that I mean, we all have different stories. Some people will tell you that, they took my friend Gene I took my first drink at 16. I drank most of the keg. My car rolled over, and I got arrested by the cops. And that was the first in a string of, 15-year drinking career. Other people end up in jail. My deal was that alcohol gave me something that allowed me to function in a world that I couldn't function in, I don't know why that is, but this management of my life became all critical, and I did horrific in school, just awful. I still have my report cards. If you saw them, you wouldn't bet on Dick Hall for a minute. I don't know what my parents thought. Probably, I don't know what they thought. But anyways, yeah, that's right. You think we adopted the wrong kid? They did think that. Thanks, Tony. That's right on. That is right on. I'm sure they did. I'm sure they scratched their head at times and said, "What the hell did we do here?" My father was a Dartmouth grad. He's got a son that can't even barely squeaks through high school. You wouldn't have bet on me. So somewhere around 19, I thought, okay, I didn't think it consciously, but I've got this hole that I've got to fill, and if I can fill it, I can finally be okay. Now, that isn't what I thought. What I thought was that if I can get the right job and I can get, going, I didn't have an education and I wasn't going to go to college, but if I can get this stuff and get on the right track and I can get these things, then finally everything's going to be all right. And I lived that lie for about 23 years. And I acquired everything that I set out to do. I thought, well, it would be great to have a big corner office with a mahogany desk and a big leather chair, and I think God said, "Bang, you've got it." It didn't happen that fast, but that was at the very end for me. The ironic part about the unmanageability of my life was that I had everything that I had set out, and I did everything that I had set out to be in a career. In house, in wife. I thought if I had a beautiful wife, which I do, if I had great kids, which I do, if I had, a finely manicured lawn, which I did, that I'd finally be okay. And that's where the unmanageability of my life became the most apparent. That was my bottom. And so the first step to me is of paramount importance. I have a lot of experience, working with people over the years, and one of the things that I see all the time is that we seem to put all this pressure on the fourth step. Everybody talks about the fourth step. We got to write, and we got to write, and we got to, and we got to write so that we understand ourselves, and we fear it, and we make it bigger than life and everything. And sometimes we get people through that, and then they pick up, they go out and drink, and we look at the whole thing, and what's become clear to me over the years is that it's like a house. If we don't have a foundation, it always gets back to the first step. If I'm going to try to manage this deal with any least bit of work, and I'm going to try to run my life, this probably isn't going to be very effective. Don Pritz, who is my grand sponsor, who is Jerry's sponsor. He's from Denver, Colorado, and some of you may know of him, or you may have heard his tapes. But he used to say, I don't find that people get this unless they have sufficient desperation. I have to be sufficiently desperate in order for this to be effective. Have you ever seen anybody just waltz into AA and, I thought I could do it, just waltz in and say, yeah, I'm going to meetings now and everything's fine, and yeah, I'm getting this, and it'll last for a while. But somewhere along the line, if you're that real alcoholic, that unmanageability is going to become paramount. God has a way, the Spirit has a way of just bringing that front and center for us. And that's what He did for me in year 3, as I described. See, I looked at AA like I looked at everything else. In my experience, it was just a continuum of what I had been doing for the previous 23 years, just without booze. I thought, okay, so when I finally got here, and how I got here was interesting. I won't tell the whole story, but I'll just say that the way I got to AA was I would have 2 or 3 scotches, and this guy would pick me up, and he'd bring me to a meeting. And I did that from May until October. And he never said anything. He never said, you can't come because you've been drinking, or he loved me enough to throw me in the back seat of his car, and we went, and it was like an out-of-body experience for me. And finally, on October 6, 1991, he said to me, okay, Dick, what's it going to be? And I said, I said, what do you mean, what's it going to be? And he said, well, we've done this for 6 months. Don't you think it's time to make a decision? And I said, well, geez, Brian, I don't know whether I can do that. And he said, well, let's do it for today and see what happens. And that was the last time I found it necessary to take a drink. Brian was in my life for that 6 months, and then he was out. I believe the Spirit put him there to get me sober and to get me started. And then I started to go to meetings around my house. He didn't live close by. So here's what I did. This was my modus operandi. I said, all right, AA, we're going to attack this baby with a vengeance. I'm going to, if they tell me to stand on my head and spit wooden nickels, I'm going to do it. If they say 90 and 90, I'm going to do that. I was like a lot of us, if a little is good, a lot's got to be better. So I'm going to be the secretary of 2 meetings, the treasurer of 1, 2 coffee making positions, 4 home groups and all that kind of stuff. And that's how I said, I'm going to attack this. I'm going to get a hold of it. I'm going to get my drinking problem under control, and then I'm going to move on with my life. How'd that work out? Not very good. Not very good. So the unmanageability of my life kept being put in front of me, and I kept I kept having to look at that, mostly through pain and suffering. Again, like Don said, sufficient desperation until I gave up. We have to give up to get this. Don would say that, and I know it to be true. And that, I think we all want to try to take the way with less pain. Who wouldn't? Who would want to do this work that we do? But we've got to have that providence, that grace of that suffering, of that total giving up before we can get this. I don't know how to run my life. Chuck C. said it. My life is none of my business. When I heard that, I thought, this is bizarre. My life's none of my business. What are you talking about, But that's exactly what it is. My life is none of my business. What does that look like in real life? Whether you like me or not is none of my business. Whether I get that sale or not is none of my business. Whether I'm financially okay or not is none of my business. It's a pretty daunting proposition. But I can't manage my life. And when I try, we go back to the way it was. And like people talked about tonight, you all did such a great job to describe it. We're really just, we continue to try to do that. Happily, we do it less and less if we get through, a spiritual experience, have that, that vital spiritual experience that's so necessary for us to get better, and then we can start trying to run it a little less. My prayer every day is just, God, you're going to drive the bus, and I'm going to look out the window. Some days I try to seize the wheel and drive it off a cliff, but most of the time I can not manage my life today. And you might be saying to yourself, if you haven't heard this before, how do I do that? How do I do that at work? How do I take, Chuck C. again? I love the guy. If you've never read his book, it's certainly worth grabbing from somebody. His name was Charlie Chamberlain. He was Richard Chamberlain's father, the actor, and he was an icon in AA and recovery. And he used to talk about, AA at a meeting, AA at home, AA at play, AA at work. Some people will say, well, I just, I can't do it in those places. It can be done. It can be done. We can take this program everywhere that we go, and that's when the real joy begins to occur, because we have a way to live that is second to none, and we don't have to manage our lives. So I've probably said enough about managing my life. Now I'm going to let Malcom talk about how he manages his.
Thank you, Dick. I'm not sure I saw an awful lot of surrender around the registration table.
Some of that still lingers, doesn't it?
Yes, in all of us, and God has a sense of humor in that He puts surrender opportunities in our life every day, and He puts opportunities in our life when we can recognize that our life has in fact become unmanageable, and we can renew our belief that God can do a better job of it than we can do it. That's why it's a daily program and a daily reprieve based upon maintaining fit spiritual condition. But let me talk just a little bit about how I came to be here, and how the disease of alcoholism brought me to my knees. Much like Dick, my experience of unmanageability was stretched over an awful long period of time. And I came from the school of thought where my alcoholic life had become the only normal one, and the truth had become the lie, and the lie had become the truth. And I couldn't live without the sense of ease and comfort that came at once by taking a few drinks. I was restless, irritable, and discontented unless I could again experience that sense of ease and comfort. I came from a very, very broken family. And my alcoholism is not because of my broken family. My alcoholism is because I was born with the gene, with the propensity to be an alcoholic. And I drank myself into it. I grew up in Newton, Massachusetts, in a well-to-do community. My father was the alcoholic. My mother was the Al-Anon. And my mother was the elephant in the room. Not my father. My parents kept my parents kept my father's drinking away from me. I was the youngest of 3 kids, and I didn't see an awful lot of his drinking. It wasn't at home. He didn't walk around with a bottle in his hand. He wasn't drunk in front of the kids. But I saw the deep destruction of alcoholism. I saw the deep destruction of alcoholism. I was 5 years old, and he bought an old Victorian, my mother made him, buy an old Victorian mansion in Newton. Really wasn't a real mansion, but it had maybe 11 or 12 rooms. And he proceeded to start working on every one of the 11 or 12 rooms. And he never finished a single one. And there was a point in time in my childhood when I was maybe 10, 11, 12 years old when his alcoholism had progressed to the point where nothing was getting done, where the house didn't have a kitchen. It didn't have a kitchen. And we didn't have a meal in the house. And, during that period of time, before that period of time, we would have a family dinner once in a while on Sunday afternoon. And it inevitably, my mother would push his buttons and he would scream at my mother and we would be off to the races. And my entire childhood was made up of listening to my mother and father just scream at each other. And after I was about 12 or 13 years old, I started to eat my meals down at the Tom's Pizza in Sub in Auburndale. And I started to get in trouble. I was in Rivers Country Day School at the time. And it was the spring of my 9th grade. And I took a left-hand turn. I stopped going to Latin class. And I stopped paying attention. And I started to go down to the barn with the Clancy brothers. And we weren't drinking at the time, but we were cutting class and going to the upstairs to the widow's peak of the barn, up in the where the wind thing is, and we had dirty magazines up there, and the 3 of us would sit up there, Greg and Mike Clancy and myself, and read the dirty books and talk like boys. And it didn't take long for Assistant Master Berkowitz to call me down to the office, and my mother was sitting there, and I got summarily sent home from Rivers Country Day School in Western Massachusetts. And that was the beginning of a long string of those kinds of things, and a long string of trouble. I was in 10th grade, and now I'm in Newton High School, and I'd struggled through a year somehow, and it's my 16th birthday, and I get called down to the headmaster's office of Adams House, and my mother's on the other side of the desk. And the headmaster throws me out on my 16th birthday. And it was kind of the story of my life. By then I was drinking on weekends at 16, 17 years old, and I got sent to a reform school in Center Stratford, New Hampshire, where there were 111 students, and 100 of them were wards of the state of Massachusetts. And that was where I completed high school and went on with life. And that's where I learned all about drugs, and that's where I learned how to daily drink and how to get away with all kinds of nefarious stuff. And by 18, by the time I graduated from that high school, I drank every day. I drank every day, as soon as I socially could. Not at that point, not quite till I fell into bed, but that was to come fairly soon. And it never occurred to me that I was an alcoholic. It never occurred to me that I was doing anything wrong. My alcoholic drinking seemed perfectly normal. It seemed perfectly normal to drink all the time, to want to be an adult. It made me feel like I was somebody. Because up to then, up till my 14th or 15th birthday, I was a nobody. I was absolutely nobody. So being able to act like an adult and drink like an adult made me feel like somebody. So I got married really young. I had my first child at 21. I went off and opened my first business at that same summer when I had my first child. And the race was on. The race was on for me to be somebody. It didn't matter if I was somebody to me. It mattered if I was somebody to you. It mattered if I was somebody to you. Daily drinking set in, and the entire decade of my 20s was have one child and have another child and have a divorce and get remarried and so on and so forth. And from one business to another business venture, and constantly striving and trying to be somebody, to arrive. And I never arrived. Late in that period of time, I acquired a really bad cocaine habit while I was trying to be in the business. And the cocaine habit was not an addiction to cocaine. I thought it was for a long period of time. But I came to understand in my recovery that it was an attempt to put legs on my drinking. So when I got wound up and I had plenty of coke, I could drink all night. And I wouldn't get drunk, and I wouldn't get ugly, and I wouldn't get silly, and I wouldn't get stupid. Because once again, I couldn't look stupid in front of you. I mean, I could be stupid, but that's fine. I've got to go out to the back seat of the car, and I've got to fall down. And you can't see me that way. It never occurred to me that I was an alcoholic. It never occurred to me that anything was wrong until I was doing, a half an ounce of cocaine a week. Then it occurred to me that maybe something was wrong. And my second wife at the time, her name is Joyce, she said to me one day, the cocaine's got to go. And I looked at her, and God gave me one clear thought. I looked at her and I said, the problem's not the cocaine, the problem's the booze. And God just put that thought into my head. It's one clear, true thought. Along around the same period of time, my father was in the VA hospital in West Roxbury for his umpteen millionth detox. And he was on the 4th floor in the intensive care unit, and they don't do it pretty in the VA hospital in 1983. They don't do it pretty at all. He was curled up in a ball in the fetal position, yellow, and they didn't expect him to live through the detox. And I went up there one night, coked up and drunk at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I begged him not to die, because I had never known him. Forgive me for getting emotional about it, but I had never known him. But right around this same time, I had this experience with Joyce where she said the cocaine's got to go. And this was in April of 1983. And in July 16th of 1983, I checked into NORCAP, and I have not found it necessary to have a drink or a drug since. And that is perhaps a blessing. Perhaps it's a curse as well. When the obsession was lifted, I didn't need you guys. And I didn't need Alcoholics Anonymous. And I didn't have the gift of desperation out of the gate that Dick talks about. I didn't have the gift of desperation. I didn't understand what it was to be a real alcoholic still. But I did know I was an alcoholic. I was willing to show up in these halls and say to you, hi guys, I'm an alcoholic. But I stood in the back of the hall and I looked at you guys and I watched you guys. And I didn't become a part of. alcoholism is a progressive disease. And the wreckage of active alcoholism went away. I started bringing the paycheck home, so to speak. At the end, I owed a couple of drug dealers 10 grand apiece. I owed the IRS 8 grand. I began to clear all that kind of stuff up over a period of time. I began to have a little bit of success in life. I had my third child, my daughter, in 1985. Never seen me have a drink. Awesome child, by the way. Just an awesome woman. And my disease of alcoholism progressed. And in untreated alcoholism, the progression can be uglier than the disease of active alcoholism. For me, fear grew, and it grew, and it grew, and it grew. And it began to take over every aspect and everything about my life. And I would wake up in the morning and my first thought would be fear. I would be overwhelmed with what I faced in the day. And that fear would begin to drag me around all day. And it would begin to dictate my decisions. It would begin to dictate how I acted towards you. It would dictate how I acted on my job. And obviously, it would dictate the manageability of my life. And as it became more and more and more unmanageable, and as my second divorce came, and my third marriage came, and the stepkids came, and my third wife was drinking, and I was going to save her, and obviously I couldn't save her. And finally, one day, it was blow my brains out or get some help. Blow my brains out or get some help. Clear as the day is long. And it was not an easy choice. It was not an easy choice. I went out of the house one Saturday night and I went to Union Hospital. It was Union Hospital in Framingham at the time. I went to a discussion meeting that was there on Saturday nights, and I put out my hand, and the man who was to become my sponsor, Richard F., became my sponsor, and eventually we stumbled into Jerry's house a couple of years later. And in a couple of years between, finally reaching out for some help and choosing whether to blow my brains out or not, I looked to fill that hole in me. I had become very aware that I didn't have the answer. That I didn't have God in my life. That I gave it lip service. And that something was desperately wrong with what I did and what I was doing. So when I went to an AA meeting, or I went to an AWOL, or I talked to somebody in Alcoholics Anonymous, I was hunting for the answer. It was patently obvious that I didn't have it. And it was patently obvious that I was an empty vessel, just a completely empty vessel, devoid of anything. Of the capacity to feel, of the capacity to do anything but be afraid or be angry or be less than or struggle with that, try to be somebody. So when I stumbled into the living room in Bellingham, and Dick and Dana and Benny and Jerry and Sharon were there, and when I stumbled in there, it was, I was back at that point where, give me a gun, this isn't working. Which brings us to the question of, when was I a real alcoholic? And what makes me a real alcoholic? Am I a real alcoholic because of what happened in my childhood? Am I a real alcoholic because I was born with the gene? Am I a real alcoholic because I lost all ability to control my drinking in my 20s? Am I a real alcoholic because my life was dominated by fear and resentment and anger? What's the answer to that question?
I guess we have to have that experience and find that out, and that's part of the process. For me, it was a slow one. Malcolm brought out a lot of things that I really haven't thought about in a while. That quest to be okay. I came in here and thought, that when I came into AA, I thought I was different, and I think that's part of the process too. We talked about it a little bit more tonight. Where we think that we're an alcoholic and something else. They used to call me High Bottom Dick in AA. Because I didn't look like the guy that was in the back. Pat was this guy's name. He lived in the weeds in Framingham. He was a homeless guy. And I had this experience. There was a fellow in AA. His name was Stevie B. And Stevie B was the type of guy that you love to hate. He could push my buttons in a way that nobody else could. He'd say little things that would just enrage me. And he was a great guy. He was a I call him a 1-2-3 stepper. He was good at getting the street drunks off the street and into a meeting. He used to talk about being in rehab. I think he went to 13 or something rehabs before he finally got clean and sober. And he isn't with us. He went out one night, got a dirty needle, and ended up with AIDS. And we watched him slowly deteriorate one night out. But Stevie taught me a valuable lesson, and it was along this idea of what Malcolm talks about all these different things, and he made me really humble myself. I was working at home at the time, and to show you how long ago this was, I didn't have a fax machine in my house. I had my home office, and we used to have to take the faxes down to a place where they'd run the fax and you wait for the receipt. So this particular day, I remember I was about 9 months sober, and I went down, and I was coming out of the place, and I bumped into him, and he said, how's it going today, Dick? And I said, not very good. I had that restless, irritable, discontent feeling. I told you over at the firehouse, I was plagued by just incredible anxiety and depression all during my adult life. And I like to talk about it because I think a lot of us suffer from that. I'm not talking about the type of anxiety that makes you worry a little. I'm talking about, when I read it in the book, outright terror in life. That speaks to unmanageability. I didn't know it at the time. I didn't have a clue. But I knew I was a mental misfit. That's what I really felt. And I was having one of those days where, my whole life was really just controlled by fear. I was in a sales job at the time, and, I really didn't feel like I could cut it. And I didn't feel like I was a very good sales guy. And I had, a family and everything to support. So Stevie said to me, how's it going? And I said, not very good. And he said, well, why don't we go get a cup of coffee and talk about it? And I said, all right. So we went to Marty's Kitchen in Milford, and Marty's Kitchen happens to be a place where there's two sober people running Marty's Kitchen. Marty's a woman from Dorchester, and we sat down and we had a couple coffees, and he looked at me and he says, Dick, you know what your problem is? And I said, no, but I had a feeling he was going to tell me. He said, your problem is that you think you're different than everybody else. You think you're a little better than everybody else. He said, really, all you are is a garden variety drunk. And that was like an epiphany to me. It really was. It was probably the first time that I began to think about, what am I really here? Can I come to some acceptance of my alcoholism? See, I was in I call it the try it on phase, in my sobriety. So the first 9 months, the big question was, am I an alcoholic or not? Forget about the unmanageability. I just want to know whether I'm a drunk or not, and I didn't really know the answer to that. I was trying with all my might not to be. I guess that's what it was. So he did me. That was one of the most major events in my early sobriety because he caused me to step back and take a look and say, all right. He said to me, what if you can just think of yourself as a garden variety drunk? So tonight we talked about, having a new experience. That was my new experience for that time in my sobriety, that time in my experience. And it was a real turning point in my sobriety. It was a point where I could just settle down, and it was okay to be a drunk. I could say the words, I'm an alcoholic, but it was okay to be a drunk. This is long before Jerry. Thank God regular AA, just going out there and going to meetings were there. I don't know whether I would have been ready for this. Some of us are. I have sponsees that took this a month after drinking. Bill did right out of his hospital bed. But I don't know the answer. But I don't think I would have been ready for it. I think again, I needed to have that sufficient desperation. And I had some of it, but not all of it. I was still running the show pretty much. And so Stevie B, God bless him, it's amazing what people can do that touch us. One little word, And if you've ever been on the other end of that, you're saying, God, I don't know, I don't know what I'm talking about here. That's how I feel most of the time. Why the hell would anybody want to listen to me? As a side note, that's really an important reason for being of service, because we never know, like Stevie B, how we're going to be touched by somebody else's little word, how God's going to work his way in there. So that got me a little bit more released. I think we really have to have that release, as we're trying to find step one. Admitted I'm powerless over alcohol, okay, and that my life's unmanageable. So is my life unmanageable? Now that's the next step. It seems fairly apparent to me at this stage in the game that my life was really unmanageable. I'm gripped by terror most of my adult life. I had my first anxiety attack. Now they call them panic attacks. In 1972, I was engaged to Debbie. We're about 6 months out from the wedding, and I'm laying on the floor in her parents' living room watching TV, and all of a sudden, just like that, my whole life changed. Gripped by a fear that I didn't know why or where or what. Felt like the world was coming to an end, and I couldn't tell you why. And I didn't know what to do. I went home, and my mother was a nurse, and I'm curled up in a ball on the couch, and that was the first clue. That was the real first clue at unmanageability in my life. Now, I'm not even daily drinking yet. I drank, and I had a few jackpots, but I'm not daily drinking. And now all of a sudden, my whole life goes click, and I'm in a spot that's just precarious. So that's in February of actually it was 1973, because I got married in September. So I go to the family doctor, and he whips out some benzos. That's going to be the cure for everything. And I didn't want to take them. I wasn't about pills. Like maybe some other people, would have welcomed the shot. I didn't want to do it, So some time went on, and the symptoms lessened, but I really felt like I was completely out of rotation, out of phase with life. That was the first real. I always had felt it a little bit through my teenage years, but I'll tell you what. Now I'm 22 years old, or almost 22, and I'm just buckled by this. I'm working a job, and I leave the job, and I blame it on a back injury. I could have stayed at the job, but I hurt my back, and I can't do this anymore. And I go back to my godfather's gas station. I'm working there, and I can't sleep, and then the anxiety would be followed by waves of depression. So to me, it was like a vortex. You'd get on it and you just ride it down. It would start as some simple thought, mostly caused by self, and then take off, and I'd get in these places. So now we get April, May. It's subsiding a little bit, but it's kind of there. June, July. I'm in the National Guard, and July comes, in late July, and we go off to summer camp. And in National Guard in the 70s was a way to escape the war, basically. And one of the things that we did very well was we drank a lot. And so this particular year, we were going down to Blackstone, Virginia. And instead of driving in a convoy, we were going to ride in a nice air-conditioned bus. So we mixed up some batches of gin and tonics, and that was the drink back then. Yuck. Off we went, and we went down, and I was a welder in the Guard, so we set everything up for the 2 weeks, and I used to work most of the 2 weeks. A lot of guys hung around. The anxiety comes back, but now it comes back like, whoa, I've never seen anything like it. I mean, it was a vengeance. I couldn't keep any food in my system. Might either throw it up or crap it out. The only thing I could do to relieve it, I tried to get stoned. That didn't work. I tried to drink. That didn't work. The only thing I could do to relieve it was to curl up in a ball and sleep. And all the people in my barracks are looking at me. I know all these guys for 6 years. They're all looking at me going, what's the matter with you? And I can't tell them. So finally I go on sick call. And the guy does amateur psychology on me. And I'm going to get married in about a month and a half. And he kind of gets me calmed down. I figure, all right, it'll be all right when I go home. So we get on the bus ride to go home. We drive all night from Virginia. When we get home, it's about 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to go and pick my wedding ring out that day. And Debbie picks me up, and she goes, what's the matter with you? And I said, I don't know. I don't know what's the matter with me. This is horrific. I don't know. And she, I look at it now, and I think to myself, would you have married me? Crazy stuff, I mean, she's 20. I'm 22. We're 6 weeks out from getting married, and the anxiety gets even worse. And so finally, in mid-August, I woke up one day and I said to myself, either I got to get some help here, or I'm gonna kill myself. It was that bad. And if you've ever been there, you understand what I'm talking about. And if you haven't, it sounds bizarre. I tell all this because there, I don't have that anymore. So we get married, and I said, okay, now it's gonna end. It'll be okay now. And we drink quite a bit at our wedding and everything, and it's still there. And my parents had given us a beautiful trip to Bermuda for our honeymoon, and my wedding night was probably the worst night of my life, and certainly the worst of hers. We had my friends with us in the Hilton at the Logan, and we're ready to. I didn't want to go. I said, I can't get on the plane. Let's go to the Cape. Hello. So we went to Bermuda, and I basically ruined the honeymoon. We had about 3 days, and the anxiety was so bad that we came home, and then I was working for my father-in-law, and they got me on a little tranquilizer. I went to therapy for 7 or 8 years, and finally the therapist fired me. She said she was going somewhere else, and that I was better. And she helped me a lot. She really did. But she helped me a lot. A lot of that anxiety went away. But the other thing that had happened during that time was I was daily drinking now. So I could come home and I could take the edge off. I could manage that situation. Jerry talks about it all the time. I take a drink and it goes down, and I can feel that warmth, that sense of ease and comfort. And everything kind of calms down. And it enables me to get up and, live the lie again another day rather. That's really what I'm doing. I'm living a lie. Malcom talked about it. I'm trying to convince you that I'm okay. I'm holding up that facade. That's what I did. I did it for 20 more years. So, flash forward, I got here and I was in AA like I told you, but here's what happened, So we started our little journey with Jerry in September of 1993. Thank you. And we started, and I got finished writing finally about April, and then started to do my amends. And I started noticing something different. All of a sudden, I noticed I wasn't anxious every day. And then I wasn't anxious every week. And the anxiety would still come. And I'd think to myself, all right, this isn't, God's got it. I'll let him take it. I'll give it to him. And after a little bit more time, the anxiety went away. And I haven't had depression or anxiety in 18 years. See, that's something that only the Spirit could do. I can't think my way out of it. I can't medicate my way out of it. I can't therapize my way out of it. I love to tell this story the therapist told me. She said to me one day, Richard, one of your problems is that you have low self-esteem. I said, okay, well, what do I do about that? And she said, well, you need to think good thoughts about yourself. We talk a lot about wounded self-esteem. So I drive down Route 9. I'm where Long's was. That's where the therapy center was in those days. And I start driving west towards Melford. Yes. And I'm in Framingham Center, and I'm thinking to myself, Dick, you're a pretty good guy. You're a provider, and you're a pretty decent husband, even though you punch things and throw things around. I didn't think that. You're a pretty good provider. You're this and you're that. You got a house. You got a good job. You can hold yourself in employment. And then I get a little further down the road, and I don't feel quite the same. And by the time I get to Southborough on Route 9, I'm a shit bum. See, I can't think my way into anything. If this was a disease about thinking, we could get knowledge and be okay. But I can't do it. I have to have the Spirit or God or whatever we're going to talk about that's going to do this. I can't fix me. I think some of us look at the steps and still think we're going to fix ourselves. We're going to get the answers, and then we're going to think differently, and we're going to fix ourselves. That isn't this at all. It's the Spirit. And it all starts around the unmanageability of our life. So listen, it's 10:05 by this clock and 10:07 by that clock. What do you say we call it a night? What do you think? Okay? You guys get some rest. If you want to hang out and talk, Malcolm will give you a few housekeeping notes, but we can get a fresh start tomorrow morning, and hopefully Jerry will be feeling a little better, because you're probably sick of hearing from us. But anyways, it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure to be able to share with you guys and love you guys. We're a great family here, and I hope that you experienced that this weekend. So here's Malcolm with a little housekeeping stuff.
Thanks, Dick. Thanks, everybody. And as far as the housekeeping is concerned, we are here tomorrow morning for both sessions. Breakfast is tomorrow morning from 7:30 to 8:30. And for those of you that remembered to bring your acknowledgments and your breakfast tickets, you don't need to see Dick. If you don't have your breakfast tickets or you need to buy breakfast tickets, you need to see Dick and or Ron. And we have a couple of volunteers that have volunteered to help cook breakfast, and we have a couple of volunteers that have volunteered to help clean up after breakfast. And we will start in this room at 9 o'clock.